welcome, and we are glad that you've joined us. We are looking at the life of Jesus. We started in Luke chapter 1. We find ourselves in Luke chapter 14 as we've been taking chapter by chapter, verse by verse through the life of Jesus in the Gospel of Luke. We're going to read verses 25 all the way to verse 35. If you don't have a Bible, there's one underneath the seat in front of you. We'd love for you to join along with us as we study God's Word. One of the things I know is helpful for me is not just hearing, but also seeing. And then, as you're growing in the Lord, taking notes, writing down those things that God's speaking to you so that you can go back later and go, I want to further investigate what God has been declaring or what God's been saying. And if you have a Bible, I for the longest time, I never, wanted to write in my Bible. I thought, I can't write in my Bible. Now my Bible is like all marked up because I want to kind of remember those things that God has been saying and kind of highlight those things that he's spoken. And so I can go back and reference it at a later time. And so just encourage you to, if you don't have a Bible, use that one there. If you don't own one, take that one with you. We would love to give that to you as a gift from us to you. But having your own Bible to dig into is an incredible thing. We are in verse 25, chapter 14. Let's read together verse 25 through 35. Now, great multitudes went with Jesus, and he turned and he said to them, if anyone comes to me and does not hate his father and mother and wife and children, brothers and sisters, yes, his own life also, he cannot be my disciple. Whoever does not bear his cross and come after me cannot be my disciple. For which of you, intending to build a tower, does not sit down first and count the cost, whether he has enough to finish it? Lest after he has laid the foundation and is not able to finish, all who see it begin to mock him, saying, this man began to build and was not able to finish. Or what king, going to make war against another king, does not sit down first and consider whether he's able with 10,000 to meet him who comes against him with 20,000? Or else, while the other is still a great way off, he sends a delegation and asks conditions of peace. So likewise, whoever of you who does not forsake all that he has cannot be my disciple. Salt is good, but if the salt has lost its flavor, how shall it be seasoned? It's neither fit for the land nor for the dunghill, but men throw it out. He who has ears to hear, let him hear. Jesus is on his journey to Jerusalem. He's still months away from Jerusalem and the cross and the resurrection. We'll be looking at that next week. That's still a little ways out, but Jesus is now on the journey there. And as he was making his way to Jerusalem for the final time, he has an encounter with a group of Pharisees that had invited him into his house, and they were setting a trap for Jesus. They wanted Jesus to perform a miracle on the Sabbath day, because in doing so, they would trap him, saying, look, he broke the law of Moses, and therefore we have something against Jesus, and therefore we shouldn't follow him, or all of those that were following him shouldn't follow him. And they were going to try to make their case for that. So what they did is they got a man who had dropsy. Dropsy was a very debilitating disease. It would cause someone to bloat, and they knew that if they put this man at Jesus's table or in Jesus's area, that Jesus would give attention to this man, because Jesus always gives attention to the one that's most needy that's around him. That's what Jesus does. And I love that he still does that, right? He finds the most needy amongst us, and he gives them the attention. He gives them the priority. And Jesus did that right there. And he gets this man, and before he heals him, he says, hey, guys, Pharisees, all you religious leaders, is it okay to heal a man on the Sabbath? None of them would say anything, because if they said yes, then they would say, you're breaking the law, and they would be agreeing with it. If they said no, that would mean they had no compassion for the man that was in front of them. So they just stood silent. And Jesus heals the man with dropsy. And he tells the man, you know what? But you don't want to see what's about to happen. Why don't you get out of here? He kind of dismisses them. And then he goes after the Pharisees. And he says, any one of you guys, any one of you, if you had an ox or a son, a donkey, if you had anything that was important to you, you would have been the first ones to try to help that person, but you had nothing invested in this man, so you didn't care about him. Jesus just went for the jugular. You guys are just a bunch of selfish, self-centered, self-serving men. I'll stop there. And then Jesus says, I've been watching you guys. And every one of you is jockeying for position at the table. Who's going to be further up, the closest to the guest of honor, so that you can feel important about yourself. And Jesus says, you guys, this is all a game for you. Following God is nothing but a game for you. It's all about what you're going to get out of it. He says, let me tell you what you do. Next time you throw a little feast, he says, sit at the bottom of the table. And then if you're that important, someone will invite you to sit up closer. That was totally opposite of how they were acting and what they were doing. And Jesus says, this is how you should be acting. And then Jesus turns to him and says this, and this was great. He says, he called the guy who was hosting the feast. He says, you know what? Next time you have a feast, why don't you invite those that are lame and blind and poor? That way, they can't pay you back. And then your reward will be great in heaven. Now, Jesus doing those things, he was gathering a crowd of common people that were going, man, I like this guy. I don't know about you. When Jesus does those things, I go, man, I like this guy. I like that Jesus isn't just playing their religious game. He's not going along with all of their facades and all of their just pretense that they are putting on. Jesus said, you guys are phony. You guys are fakes. And the crowd loved it. The crowd loved that somebody was finally standing up to the religious leaders who were just putting on this show and this game. Matter of fact, when you look at verse 25, notice what it says to us here. It says, now great multitudes went with Jesus, and he turned and he said to them. Guys, that means that it wasn't just a multitude of people, and that term's used often. It wasn't just a great multitude of people. It was great multitudes of people. That means the crowds had gathered immensely around Jesus. They were coming from afar. They were coming, they were following him, leaving everything. We want to hang out with Jesus. And one of the things that you see about Jesus is that Jesus was never impressed with the multitudes. Jesus was not impressed with the crowds that were gathering around him, because he knew what was in them. He knew a lot of them were there for ulterior motives. You start to gather a crowd, and in some circles, they think that's the goal, man. If we can just get a crowd, that's success, and that means we're doing something right. You see, when that begins to happen, oftentimes those that are gathering the crowd say, you know what, I don't want to say anything to offend anybody because we might lose some of the crowd, and we want the crowd to come back next week. And so they kind of soft pedal what Jesus says, and they kind of water down what it means to be a disciple of not Jesus. Not Jesus. Jesus, matter of fact, he's going to say some things that are very challenging to the crowds. Because he knew some of them were following Jesus because, they saw the miracles that Jesus was doing. They're going, man, this is cool to be around. It's kind of an in thing to do. Go out and watch Jesus heal some lame guy or some blind guy or some guy with dropsy. And, we're going to get a hangout with Jesus. And there's something amazing is going to happen. Who doesn't want to be around that? Some of them were there because, I don't know if you remember, on a few occasions, Jesus would take the bread and he would multiply the bread and he would feed thousands. So you got a free meal on top of it. The miracles. And then there were some that were just zealots. Man, that guy's going against Jesus. I'm with him. That guy Jesus is going against the Pharisees. I'm in. He's gonna buck the religious system, man. That's what I'm talking about. I'm all in for that. And so Jesus turns to this crowd, and Jesus simply tells them, if anyone's going to come to me, and he doesn't hate his father and his mother and wife and his children, his brothers and sisters, yes, even his own life also, he cannot be my disciple. What in the world? I don't know about you. The first time I read that, it was like, what is Jesus saying? You can't be my disciple? What's a disciple? Well, so someone who's a disciple is someone who is following after someone's lifestyle, someone's skill, someone's ability. It's not a word that's just used within Christianity or in a religious sense. Someone can be a disciple of a carpenter or a painter or someone who has some skill, and you go, man, I like the way this guy does things. I like his trade. I want to learn from him. And so I'm going to bring myself under his tutelage. I want to really see how he does what he does. I want to spend the rest of my life emulating that person so that one day I can be like that person. And Jesus says, look, if you want to be one of my disciples, one of my students, if you want to be someone who's following after me, you need to understand the very first principle is this: you cannot have any other priority. You cannot have any other loyalty. You can't have someone that takes a higher place in your life than me. That's what a disciple of Jesus is. It's someone who realizes that it doesn't matter what anybody else says or what anybody else thinks. Man, my mom, my dad, my brother, my sister, my wife, my children, it doesn't matter what anybody else thinks or says, that my first loyalty is to Jesus. That word, then he says love there, it's really the idea that if you love anybody more than me, he says if you don't love less, your mom, your dad, your brother, your sister, anybody, any relationship that you have, he says, then you can't be my disciple. Because the disciple of Jesus is going to be someone who goes against what the natural man is going to dictate, what the natural man's going to declare. And if your loyalty is to your mom and dad, then you'll never be able to have a loyalty to Jesus. If your loyalty is to your wife greater than to Jesus, then you'll never be able to be a follower of his. Or your children. Or any other thing, because he has to take the preeminent spot in your life. And that's what Jesus is telling his disciples. William Barclay, in his commentary, he wrote this. I thought this was great. Watch what he says. It's possible to be a follower of Jesus without being a disciple. To be a camp follower without being a soldier of the king. To be a hanger-on in some great work without pulling one's weight. Once someone was talking to a great scholar about a young man. He said, so-and-so tells me that he was one of your students. The teacher answered devastatingly, he may have attended my lectures, but he was not one of my students. It's one of the supreme handicaps of the church that in it there are so many distant followers of Jesus and so few real disciples. Wow. That hits home. There's so many that say, hey, I believe Jesus. I put my faith in Jesus, but I'm not really a disciple of Jesus. And Jesus is talking to his disciples, and he's saying, look, if you're going to be a disciple of mine, your agenda in life has to be under my tutelage. It has to be under my heart, under my direction, not any other loyalty. No one else can take that precedence over your life, man. And if you come to, and I think it's something that, all of us got to come to that conclusion. I know for me, I came to realize this, that my loyalty to Jesus is often going to contradict what anybody else would want for my life. And what my mom and dad thought, I remember telling my dad, Dad, I'm moving to Belen because, I feel the Lord's calling me there. And my dad just like, son, you're crazy. Don't, what are you doing? Because, he was from here. He grew up here. He knew that you're not going to have a job. You're not going to be able to support your family. I mean, my dad was, I was living in LA where there was, I was working as a journeyman carpenter. I was getting paid good money. I was, working a business. I mean, there was all these things going. And I remember just going, wait a second. I either have to obey what Jesus is telling me or I have to obey what my dad's telling me. There's a conflict here. There's a conflict. And I have to decide, are you going to do what he wants or are you going to do what my dad wants or what my family wants? And that's exactly what Jesus is putting on the table here. He's saying, look, if you're going to follow me, man, it's going to cost you everything. It's going to be the highest priority of your life. It's going to take precedence over what your own family thinks, what your own friends think, what your own wife or husband may think. Think about this. Paul the Apostle, he was part of the Sanhedrin, which means he was one of the 70 elders of Israel. And in order to be part of that class, you had to be a Pharisee, you had to be married, and you had to have some kind of life that was in a stable marriage environment. And this is what we know. Paul was single. And we know that he started to follow Christ radically. And it's believed that because of his decision to follow Christ, that his wife decided to leave him. Because he understood this, man, either I'm going to do what God's asked me to do, whether this woman wants to follow me or not, man, I got to do what God's asked me to do. And I don't think Jesus is trying to divorce anybody or break anybody up, because if you love Jesus, let me tell you something, you're going to love your husband or your wife or your children more than you could have ever loved them before that. There's a greater loyalty and there's a greater love. He's not saying, look, you love me, now you can leave your spouse. That's not what he's saying. What he is saying is that this priority has to be first. This part of your life has to take precedence over every other relationship that you'll have. You see, what Jesus is asking of his disciples was complete loyalty and complete obedience to him. That's really what he's saying. That's supreme. He's the relationship that matters the most in my life. That's what a disciple of Jesus is. This relationship takes precedence over every other relationship. That's why you think about all those relationships he mentions here. Guys, these are as high up the relationship ladder as you can get, isn't it? Mom and dad, brothers and sisters, wife. And yet he says, look, I have to take that place in your life if you're going to be my disciple. I have to be first. And then okay, we can handle that up until that point. That's really cool. I might be able to agree with some of that, but look at verse 27. And whoever does not bear his cross and come after me cannot be my disciple. Now you're getting personal. Now you're getting a little personal. You bear your cross? It's the cross that was the symbol of death. We've glamorized the cross. Everyone wears a cross. They're not even Christians. They wear a cross on their neck, and they think it's, just a cool fashion statement or something. The cross was it would be like you walking around going, hey, what's that little chair on your neck? Oh, that's my electric chair. Your electric chair? What are you talking about? Oh, yeah, it's my symbol of death. That's what the cross meant. And Jesus hadn't yet gone to the cross, but let me tell you something. It was a common knowledge in Rome or anywhere that Rome had power over, that if you carry your cross, what you're declaring and what you're saying is that you're a dead man. You would take that cross and the Romans would usher you right down the middle of the city square. So that everybody in the room, everyone in the city, everyone, that's anybody that's watching you would know that guy's going to die. That guy ain't got long to live. And the reason that the Romans would do it was so that anybody that wanted to do what that criminal had just done would have second thoughts about doing it. You want to rebel against Rome? You'll be the next guy walking down the city streets with a cross on his back. And so it was a deterrent. It was a reminder to everybody that if you don't come under Rome's authority, you'll be forced to come under Rome's authority. You will eventually come under that authority, and you will display that Rome's authority over your life by carrying a cross all the way up to the place where you would be crucified, and then it would just be a matter of days, hours before you would eventually die the most excruciating death you would ever want to die, and everyone would know that Rome rules you. And Jesus says this, pick up your cross. He's not the one putting the cross on you. He's telling you to do it. Pick up your cross. Deny yourself. Now that's really, this whole picture is what he's saying. And what you're saying is that the authority over my life is not me. The authority over my life is Jesus Christ. He owns me. At one point I rebelled against him. At one point I was in opposition to him, but no longer. I willfully surrendered my heart, my life over to him. And as a result of it, man, I don't own me anymore. He owns me. That's what picking up a cross. I hear so many people say, you know what, man, I'm just bearing my cross right now. My mother-in-law, she's my cross. My husband, my husband, he's my cross. No, he's not your cross. No, you don't know him. He's my cross. And I think sometimes we want to think, this disease I have or this sickness, that's my cross. That's not your cross. Your cross is that you're dying to yourself and you're saying, God, not my will, but your will be done. And we have to take up that cross daily because our flesh wants to go in opposition to what Jesus wants us to go often. And I got to come back and say, wait a second, man. My cross is that I've given him the authority and I give him the rule over my life. And what he says is what I'm going to live my life for, not what I think or what someone else says. That's true Christianity. That's not radical Christianity. That's Christianity the way Jesus defined Christianity. And don't let someone try to lessen what Christianity is in your life. Don't let come and someone say, well, if you just go to church once a week, or you just give your tithe, or you just do this, or you just do that, that's not Christian. Christianity is what Jesus defines, and what he defines is, look, Christianity is that God, my life is yours now. My life belongs to you. This isn't about me getting my agenda done. This is about me getting your agenda done. This is my cross. And let me just tell you guys, man. I remember for the longest time in my own life, I didn't want to surrender my life to Jesus because I thought the moment I surrender my life to Jesus, Jesus is going to make me do something I don't want to do. He's going to send me to Africa. I don't know why Africa. I always thought, what, I get saved, I get radical, about Jesus, he's going to send me to Africa. And I was always like, no, I don't want to go to Africa. And then, I get saved, and then I say, all right, Lord, whatever you want. And then he sends me to Belen. Just a little bit different than Africa, but not much. But I say that jokingly, but let me tell you, I hated Belen. I was born in Belen. My family visited Belen with all my aunts and uncles, and I thought, man, why does anybody live there? I did. And then let me tell you what happened, man. God began to change my heart. He began to give me a love for the Rio Grande Valley. He began to give me a love for this community. And when we were moving here, I couldn't wait to get here. I was like, what's wrong with you? I couldn't wait to get here. I couldn't wait to see what God wanted to do. And God began to change the desires of my heart so that when I was doing what God had asked me to do, I'm actually doing what I wanted to do because God began to change that desire in my heart. And I cannot imagine being anywhere else than where God wants me to be. And I love this community. I love this valley. And my prayer is, God, get this. I want to see this whole valley saved. Because God put a burden there. You know, and I share that with you guys. I think sometimes we think if I pick up my cross, it's just going to be miserable. If I just abandon everything and say, God, your will, you know, I'm going to live a horrible life. Let me tell you, it's the most radical life you can ever want to live. I don't know what God's going to do tomorrow. You know, I'm just on for the ride. All right, God, what's next? What are you going to do, you know, this morning? How many people are going to come to know you this week? I mean, God, what's your plan? And you begin to live this life where you're just going, man, I can't wait to see what God has in store. Because God, He wants to take our lives and He wants them to have meaning and purpose and value. But as long as we're trying to hold on to our life, Jesus said it like this: you try to save your life, you lose it. You lose your life for my sake, you gain it. You try to save your life, you're like, I don't want to let go, I don't want to let go. And you go, all right, you want to settle for that? Go for it. It's not going to take you anywhere. It's never going to satisfy you. It's never going to complete you. It's never going to accomplish what God intended for your life. But when you finally bring it and say, God, I give, I'm surrendered, whatever you desire. And then God goes, now I got something to work with. And then He begins to fulfill His purposes in your life. You see, Jesus is laying out for us what real Christianity should look like. And if someone sold you something different, man, they lied to you. Guys, Christianity it isn't about, you know, just you putting all the checks in the boxes that you completed and now you're good. That's not Christianity. Christianity is, God, I'm done with me. I'm done with this world. I'm done with everything. I want to live my life radically for you. That's Christianity. And what's incredible is that Jesus, you know, brings His disciples to this place. Now I want you to consider this. Jesus is about 3 years into His ministry now. Some of them had been following Jesus for a long time. Some of them had been following Jesus, you know, the disciples for the 3 years. You know, they're going, I never heard this stuff before. Cross, dying, highest priority. I mean, wait a second. But Jesus brings it to their attention at this point. He says, look, guys, this is what why did Jesus do that? Because He knew what was right around the corner. In a few short months, Jesus was going to go to a cross. He was going to hang on that cross. His disciples were going to be persecuted, and eventually they're going to be scattered throughout the whole world. And Jesus didn't want to give them some false implication or some false promise that, you know, you just say this little prayer and your life's going to be perfect from here on out. You're not going to have any more problems, no more diseases. You're not going to have any more money issues. Everything's going to be great. No, that's not what Jesus did. Jesus said, look, you want to follow me and you want to be a disciple of mine, then it's going to cost you. But what it costs you is worth it. It's worth it. You see, Jesus isn't trying to talk them out of following Him. He don't want anyone to perish. He wants everyone to come to repentance. He's not trying to say, look, this is going to be hard. You better really make sure you want to. No, that's not what Jesus is going. Look, if you're going to start this, you better be ready to finish this. It's a battle. He's going to tell us here. It's like building a building. You have to have endurance. It's like going to a war. You have to be willing to lay it all down. And before you ever get into that building project, or before you ever get into that war, you better sit down and make sure that you're willing to pay the price. You got to count the cost. Understand what this means. Now, remember now, as Jesus gives two parables. One of those parables, he began there in verse 28, where he says, which of you, intending to build a tower, does not sit down first and count the cost, whether he has enough to finish it? Last, after he's laid the foundation and he's not able to finish it, all who see it begin to mock him. Now, he's relating it to a building project. You ever have built a house? You ever started a project? And you go through a lot of investment, a lot of work just to get the foundation poured. You got to get the rough-in plumbing. You got to get, the electrical stubbed out. There's a lot of time, a lot of effort, a lot of money that you're investing in order to get the foundation. Then you go and get the walls up. Now you got the lumber costs, and then all of the labor to get the wall standing. You get the roof up, and then you go and you look at your banking account and you go, wait a second, man, I'm out of money. I don't have enough money for the roof. I don't have money to put the stucco and the sheathing, all around the building. And you go by someone who's began a project and they don't finish it, and about 6 months later, a year later, 2 years later, you see all the boards are warping. The rains come in and it's caused everything to swell, and the plywood's already warped, and you're just looking at it going, man, what in the world? Who would take that much time and effort to begin a building and then not finish it? What a waste. There's a place, and if you guys are ever going up toward Taos on the highway there from Espanola, kind of leaving Espanola, going into the mountains there's a 2-story building that stood there for years, framed up and never finished. And I remember driving by that, every time I pass by, I go, man, why? You just like, what a fool. I would mock that guy. I didn't even know him. Why would you go and pour, that much money into something that you're not going to complete? You can't even get your money back. They don't even have nowhere to live. And that's what he says about your Christianity. He says, you don't go and start something without weighing out what it's going to cost you. Without acknowledging, if I'm going to start this, I got to finish it. And it's sad that so many people start this life with Jesus, and somewhere down the road, man, they throw in the towel. And everyone remembers, man, weren't you? Well, didn't you used to go to Bible study? I mean, weren't you at church? Oh yeah, and you change the subject. And what happens is that, what? No one ever forgets that. No one ever forgets it, that at one point you had surrendered your life to Jesus, that you were telling everybody about Jesus, and they'll remind you, and it be not to your face, not going to tell you, laugh at you or nothing. They're behind your back, they will. It becomes a mockery. And the greater damage is what happens to Jesus. Because how many people are considered and they say, you know what, I knew so-and-so, I knew so-and-so, and they started with Jesus, but they didn't finish. Maybe Jesus isn't that great to follow. Maybe because that person didn't stay with it, or maybe Jesus let him down, and the world looks at it and they go, man, maybe Jesus isn't strong enough. Maybe Jesus isn't good enough. Maybe Jesus let him down at some point, and it becomes a mockery to Jesus, and it becomes a mockery to his people. Because you started this race, and it wasn't Jesus that let you down. It was you got your attention somewhere else and your priority somewhere else. And now this is more important, or this relationship's of a greater importance than Jesus. And so now you decide, I started this, but I don't want to finish it. I'm going to take off. I'm going to let something else become my priority. And it becomes a mockery. And the world sees it. The world should never see an off-again, on-again Christian. The world should never see someone who says, yeah, I'm in this, I'm heading that direction, and then that person just throws in the towel at some point. The world should never see that. He likens it to a war. Did you notice that next parable there in verse 31? He says, what king is going to make a war against another king? And he doesn't sit down first and he doesn't consider whether he's able to, with 10,000 to meet him who comes against him with 20,000. He says, you're going to go to battle. You know how many people are on the other side that you're going to fight against. You know that you're outnumbered. And then you decide, you know what, let's fight him anyway. Let's go for it. I think we can. And then you get right up to the battle line and you go, maybe not. Now you got to go make conditions of peace. And now the negotiating power for the other guy is going to be a little bit greater than before. And you're just kind of like, okay. And he goes, wait a second. Who does that? That should be something that never happens. And that's why Jesus is talking to his disciples, and he's saying, look, before you ever begin this building, of your life, or before you ever go. Now, I think there's incredible, second layers to that teaching that Jesus is going. Because think about what happens when you give your life to Jesus Christ. He's beginning to mold you, to shape you, to make you into the person he wants to be. It's his building project. You're his workmanship. You're the one who God has taken, and he's beginning to change. When you say, Jesus, I surrender to you, you're saying, Jesus, come and take this life and you form it into the likeness of yourself. And he's working that in us. That's a cool picture, because and he doesn't want to stop that project halfway through. He wants to finish. And what he begins, he finishes. The only one who can stop that is you. Because he also likens it to a war. And think about this, guys. We're in a spiritual battle. We're in a spiritual war going on right now. That war is for our children. Our war is for our culture. The war is for your soul. And it's worth fighting. And he's laying out all of this, these things to his disciples. And then he says there in verse 33, now, think about where we're at here. He says, look, so likewise, just like that building project, just like that battle, he says, so likewise, whoever does not forsake all that he has cannot be my disciple. He says, look, this is a forsaking. Now, that Jesus isn't saying, you have to give, and some have interpreted it this way. That means you have to, live under a bridge. You have to, give up your bank account. You just forsake everything. If you're going to follow Jesus, you've got to forsake everything. That's not what Jesus is saying. What he is saying is that if you're not willing for me to be the priority of your life, if you're not willing to say, God, it's all yours. It's all yours. Whatever you want me to do, I'm a servant, I'm a steward. I've been entrusted with what you've entrusted to me. Help me to be faithful with those things so that I can bring honor to your name. And so when Jesus says, if you're not willing to forsake all, man, you cannot be my disciple. Wow. Jesus is looking for radical abandonment of self. That's what he's looking for. And if you want to be a disciple of Jesus, that's what he's looking for in your life, and it's what he's looking for in my life. And then at the end of that passage, there in verse 34, notice what Jesus, he says, salt is good. But if the salt has lost its flavor, how shall it be seasoned? Salt is good. Guys, salt in this culture had great value. When a Roman soldier would get his salary, salarium, that was where we get the word salary from. He would get his rations of salt. And that salt had great value. It was a preservative. You caught some fish. You're only eating half that fish. You wanted to save some for that. You pack it in salt, and it would keep all the bacteria from growing on that fish, so that down the road, there was no refrigeration. Down the road, you'd be able to eat that fish, and you would be able to preserve it for a later time. If you had a wound, you get salt and you rub it in your wound. You ever heard some of you, we're going to rub some salt in your wound? That was a good thing in that day, because it meant that it would kill the bacteria that were growing, so an infection didn't take place. It would preserve. Now, what's interesting is that you and I, Jesus said, are the salt of the earth. You're the salt. We're the preserving factor in this world. Because when the church is taken out of this world, then there's going to be nothing to preserve it any longer. That's when the 7 years of tribulation begins. That's when God's wrath is being poured out upon the world. That's when the devil just has his day, his time to bring destruction upon this world. There's coming a day when the bride of Jesus is going to be removed. The salt of the earth is going to be taken out, and then it's going to be decay. And until that day, you and I have been called to be the salt of the world. We're the salt. He tells us, again, in William Barclay's commentary, I love this commentary in this chapter. It says this means that true Christianity must act as a preservative against the corruption of the world. The individual Christian must be the conscience of his fellows, and the church is the conscience of the nation. That's our job. We're the preservative. We're the one who stands on the pillar of truth, and we say, you know what? This is what God says. This is what's right. Salt is good. But if that salt loses its flavor, now this is what you find out about salt. Salt can't lose flavor. Because why does Jesus say the salt loses its flavor? Here's the one way it can lose its flavor, is if other elements get mixed in with that salt. That salt becomes less salty. If you're taking a little bit of sand and you put it in your salt, you no longer want to. The other day we had made some papos con agua, and my wife forgot to put the salt in it, and it's like, what? Ooh, where's the salt shaker? I just started piling that stuff on. And the reality is that you become the salt of the earth. We're the one who adds flavor to this world. We're the preserving factor of this world. And we should, people should go, man, I want more of what you got on my life, right? That it's something that hopefully that you're walking around and you're not one of those like sour sucking lemons Christians. You know what a sour sucking lemon Christian is? Someone's like, they got that, just that face that you go like, man, whatever he's got, I don't want it. But that there's joy. They were walking around with, man, I got everything. I'm rich because of Christ. I'm blessed because of what he's done in my life. That our flavor, that other people will go, man, I want that. I want that. Another thing that salt does is it creates a thirst. I think it's a movie theater conspiracy. They sell popcorn there so that you buy the biggest soda they offer, and they're like $30 for because you know that if you're going to have a bucket of popcorn, you're going to need a gallon of drink. And guys, that's what hopefully your life is creating a thirst in the life of others, going, man, they got something. I want it. I want to be satisfied with what they have to offer. You see, this whole picture here, everything that Jesus is saying, look, you can't have a salt and other minerals mixed together and have it accomplish what it was intended to accomplish. You can't. You can't have, someone who's on again, off again, or someone who's compromising with this world and everyone's gonna go, oh yeah, that's what I know. Let me tell you something. When someone is living a compromised life, no one wants to be like that. The world looks at it and they go, man, that guy acts just like everybody else. I thought he was a Christian. We're the preserving factor. We're the preservative of the world. And if we lose our flavor because the world's infiltrated us, then how is the world going to be preserved? You see, we're to be different from the world. We're to be living a life that's in contrast, in opposition to the world. Because we've said, Jesus, I'm your disciple. I'm learning from you. I'm following you. What you say is right's right. What you say is wrong. What you say goes in my life, and I want to live a life that's pleasing to you. I don't just kind of go like, well, maybe today I'll follow Jesus, but maybe next week I won't. I'll go to church, half the time. That's not what Jesus is asking for. He's asking for an abandonment of self, where I can grow. Could you imagine what it would have been like to be in that crowd that day with Jesus? How many of those that claim to be disciples just decided, hey, I don't know, I didn't count on all that. And then the question for ourselves, have we really considered what it means to be a Christian? Have you really considered, guys, and understand something, guys, in that day, you called yourself a Christian, it meant that oftentimes you would be ostracized from your whole family. If you were a Jew and you're living in Jerusalem in that culture, and you decide, I'm going to become a follower of Jesus, your mom and your dad, your brother and sister are going to say, you know what, we want nothing to do with you. And there's documented stories of people who mom and dad would literally have a funeral for their son or daughter because they became a Christian. You're dead to me. You want to follow Christ, you're dead to me. You're out of my will. You're out of my life. I don't want your kids over. I don't want your grandkids over. I don't want anything to do with you. And yet Jesus is saying, you know what? You choose. You want to follow me? Guys, that's true of a lot of places in our culture today as well. In our world today. In a Muslim country, You decide you're going to follow Christ, it's a death sentence. It's a death sentence. You're doing it at your own demise. You want to follow Christ, it's going to kill you. And let me tell you, man, there's hundreds and thousands of Muslims coming to faith in Jesus Christ right now. You want to read a good book, Killing Christians. That's in the bookstore. Killing Christians, man. Modern day martyrs that are having encounters with Jesus, and they're saying, you know what? I don't care if I die. I don't care what my family says, what my family does. I met Jesus, and he's the one I want to follow. I'd encourage you to grab that book, man. It blew my mind, some of the things that are going on in our current society right now. You see, Jesus is challenging the crowds to make a decision. Did you hear what he said at the very end of that? It's neither fit for the land nor for the dunghill, but men throw it out. He who has ears to hear, let him hear. Here's what Jesus is saying. I'm going to wrap it here, guys, but here's what Jesus is saying. Look, if you're going to live that compromised life, you have no value spiritually. You're actually causing more damage than good. Does that mean Jesus is saying, if you're not going to be radically, don't follow? This is what's cool. You know what the next verse is? Next week's our resurrection services, so we won't be in Matthew 15 next week. But the next time we get to Luke 15. We won't get to Luke 15 for 2 weeks. But the only tell you what the next teaching is? Jesus talking about the lost sheep that he went after. One, and he left the 99. Jesus isn't saying, hey, shape up, bucko, or I'm kicking you out. That's not what he's saying. What he is saying is this. Understand what it means to be a disciple. And he'll run after you because he wants you to be part of his kingdom. And if you wander, he's going to chase you down because he loves you. But you and I have no impact upon this world unless we do what he says.